hey, Elevate. Hey, last week we kicked off a brand new series called Canceled. And we've been talking a little bit about cancel culture and how social media can sometimes be a pretty ugly and angry place. But social media can actually be a really entertaining place. For example, there are just a few people that I'm not quite sure they understand how social media works. Like Maxine, for instance. Maxine's using her status to say hi to her family and friends. Thanks, Maxine. Or this lady who printed off 15 pages of Facebook posts and is just reading the comments. Now, does anyone have a family member who is a little confused about how the internet or social media works? Have you ever had to help them solve a technology problem? Now, I like to think that I'm actually pretty good at figuring that stuff out, but my wife Crystal is way better. She understands the algorithms of Instagram, and she's creeping up on 6,000 followers for a business that she started. She knows how to attract and keep her followers. She's really good at editing videos for her IG stories. She has really high engagement rates with her followers, and that's just a small flex on her. But since she's so good, I'm always asking her questions about how to do different things. And she's mostly always willing to lend a hand. And I'm sure the same goes for you. You're happy to help your grandparents or your parents or maybe even your siblings figure out their technology questions. But eventually you might start to lose your patience a little bit when the questions start to build up. It's easy to get frustrated when someone needs help doing something that seems super easy and basic to us. And I'm sure there are times you want to tell them to just look it up on YouTube, but then you might have to explain what YouTube is to them too, and you just don't want to go down that road. Now, maybe it's not with technology, but every day we face opportunities to help others in small ways. Everyone is helpful and generous sometimes, but what about the times that we'd rather not? When we're too busy, or annoyed, or tired, or sure someone else will help if we don't. Every day, we're surrounded by people who need help with things that are a lot more serious than figuring out how to post a picture on Facebook or Instagram. And maybe you've already thought about a time when you failed to help someone in need. Or maybe you remembered a time when you needed help, but no one was there for you. Or maybe you did both. So when we're in need, we are at our most vulnerable. But unfortunately, we don't always respond with compassion, care, or concern when we see someone else in need. Instead, we respond with impatience, discomfort, disgust, or suspicion. We can often jump to conclusions specifically about that individual and use it to justify why we shouldn't help them or why they don't deserve our help. The reality is that sometimes we'll be the ones who are able to help, and sometimes we'll be the ones in need. And knowing that, wouldn't you like to live in a world where we are all cared for, where we all care for each other when we're at our most vulnerable? I know I would. And I believe that kind of world is possible, and that's what Jesus is challenging us to go and create. In the Gospels, which are the first 4 books of the New Testament, that tell the stories of Jesus' life, we find examples of Jesus meeting the needs of the most vulnerable people. And Jesus' days were often interrupted by people's cries for help, like one of my favorite passages in Mark chapter 10, verse 46 through 52. It says, "Then they reached Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples left town, a large crowd followed behind him. A blind beggar named Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, was sitting beside the road. When Bartimaeus heard that Jesus of Nazareth was nearby, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." "Be quiet," many of the people yelled at him. But he only shouted louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." When Jesus heard him, he stopped and said, "Tell him to come here." So they called the blind man. "Cheer up," they said. "Come on, he's calling you." Bartimaeus threw aside his coat, jumped up, and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. "My rabbi," the blind man said, "I want to see." And Jesus said to him, "Go, for your faith has healed you." Instantly the man could see, and he followed Jesus down the road. Bartimaeus pleaded for help, but was told to be quiet. The crowds couldn't be bothered. To them, he was just another beggar, not worthy of help or attention. But to Jesus, Bartimaeus was worthy of his time, his attention, and his help. But Jesus doesn't just show us how to care for people in need. He talked a lot about it too. Shortly before his death, Jesus used a parable to explain something important about God and the kingdom of God. And in this parable, he used two animals, sheep and goats. And before we read what Jesus had to say about sheep and goats, there's something that you should know about these animals. Goats, now we're not talking about the acronym greatest of all time. In this, they're not good. Goats are pretty independent. Even when they're members of a herd, they often explore or head out alone. They tend to be more concerned about themselves than they are about their goat friends. Sheep, on the other hand, are all about their herd. They stick together at all times. And keep this in mind as we read this parable from Jesus. In Matthew chapter 25, picking up in verse 33, it says, "He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you invited me into your home. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me.' And all the righteous people, they all asked him, 'When did we do those things for you?' And he responds by saying, 'Whatever you did for the least of these,' meaning the most vulnerable people, you did for me." And then picking up in verse 41, "Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, 'Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty and you didn't give me a drink.'" So how does Jesus judge who are sheep and who are goats? According to how they treat people, specifically people who are in need. Goats, the unrighteous, goats were the ones who didn't care for people in need. Maybe because they were too busy thinking about themselves. But the righteous sheep were the ones who saw someone in need and ran to help. Sheep are the kind of people who keep their eyes open for the needs of others and ask, "How can I help?" See, Jesus consistently cared for people who had been canceled, forgotten, disrespected, and ignored because of their needs. And he challenges you and I, to do the same. So when we study the actions and the teachings of Jesus, there are a few things we can learn about how to meet the needs of others. The first is, it's not only about our actions, it's about our heart. Jesus doesn't challenge us only to act concerned about others or to put on a show of meeting people's needs. In his parable, the sheep didn't know anyone had noticed what they did for others. Jesus doesn't only care about what we do, he cares about the motivation we have behind it. Is it for our glory or for his? The second is, it's not only about loving others, it's about loving God. Jesus challenges us to love others well, yes. But he's letting us in on a secret. When we love others by meeting their needs, we're putting our allegiance to Jesus on display. It's a gift of love and worship to God. The third thing is, it's not about what we have, but it's about what we can give. As we've talked about meeting the needs of others, maybe you've thought, I can't help anyone. My family doesn't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot to give. But Jesus was talking to ordinary people like you and me. No matter what we have, time, compassion, money, friendship, skills, he says we can use it for God's purposes and kingdom when we give sacrificially, passionately, and willingly. And number 4, it's not about them, it's about us. Sometimes when we talk about meeting others' needs, we talk as though we're the people with the power, the resources, or the stuff to share, while people in need are a separate group of people, as if they're less valuable. But that's not what Jesus did. He treated them not just with compassion, but with respect. He made the crowds pay attention to them. Instead of speaking for them, he asked them to speak for themselves. Jesus didn't just give people charity, he gave people dignity. And we can do that too when we remember that it's not about us and the people who need us. There is only us. We're all equally loved and seen and valued by God. So how do we do this? How can we care for the people around us who are in need? Do we need to wait for a little girl to walk up to us in a restaurant? Do we need to ask God to help us heal the blind or the sick? How do we practically meet the needs of the people around us? And there's so many opportunities all around us because there's so many needs all around us, especially in this season. If we're paying attention, just like Jesus noticed the needs of Bartimaeus and the sick woman, what would it look like for you to notice a need and then respond in love? How might you do the same? Could you give a meal to someone who needs it? Could you share a meal with someone who's lonely? Could you stay after school to help someone study or help a friend perfect their free throw before basketball tryouts? Could you check in on someone who's going through a really hard time? See, in Jesus' time, people in need were often canceled by society instead of helped. They were ignored, judged, or left to fend for themselves, and we still have that problem today. But if you want to love like Jesus loves, love people who are in need, help the vulnerable, extend a hand to someone who needs it. And when you do, Jesus says it is an act of worship that will point more people to him than any words you could ever say.